Let's check out this story. This is amazingly from the New York Times. Will American ideas tear France apart? Some of its leaders think so. Politicians and prominent intellectuals say social theories from the U.S. on race, gender, and post-colonialism are a threat to French identity and the French Republic. Now, that is amazing. They say high-profile intellectuals and journalists are warning that progressive American ideas, specifically on race, gender, post-colonialism, are undermining their society. There's a battle to wage against an intellectual matrix from American universities, warned Mr. Macron's education minister. Emboldened by these comments, prominent intellectuals have banded together against what they regard as contamination by the out-of-control woke leftism of American campuses and attendant cancel culture. Of all of the countries in Europe that we would point to, France is particularly left. Not like everyone likes to point to Scandinavia, but come on. The French Revolution, the leftists, the socialists, the Jacobins. I'm not saying that they're the furthest left, but, they're one of the examples people cite, especially considering Jacobin magazine is a socialist magazine. And they're stepping up and saying, nah, to all this stuff, which is good. Because in my opinion, the wokeness on the left is infecting left ideas and turning it into a weird dogmatic cult ideology that makes no sense. And I saw the best tweet to explain it. You guys, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I saw a really wonderful tweet breaking down like gender ideology. They said sexism is when you say, when someone says that women should be, they believe, doing the dishes, not men. Feminism is when the woman comes out and says both men and women can be doing the dishes. And gender ideology says anybody who does the dishes is a woman. You get it? Like that's pretty, like, I saw that and I was like, that's actually a good example of like what's happening. Because you look at actual traditional feminism and it's like women and men can wear whatever they want. Now in the modern era of this critical theory, it's whoever wears feminine clothes is a woman and whoever wears masculine clothes is a man, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's actually kind of interesting. And just because I'm a practicing Muslim and this story in France, it impacts me in a way because of obviously the struggles that the French people have had with sort of this rising threat of Islamic terrorism in the last decade. But with respect to your point about, whoever wears women's clothes and men's clothes, like I've read obviously in like religious, in Islamic scripture that like a sign of the end of times is like when you cannot tell the difference between men and women.
Is that really in there?
Yeah. It's kind of scary in a way. Again, this is religious stuff. If you subscribe to the Islamic faith, you probably know what I'm talking about. But, religion obviously isn't for everyone. And it's all based on faith. I do believe in a God. I do believe that there is a life after this one, but I'm not going to be dogmatic and just preach to you what is right and what is wrong. But with respect to this, about this sort of, you mentioned the word contagion. That is obviously very fascinating because for the longest time, at least for the last century, the Red Scare has been considered long held in Europe as like an international contagion, this threat of communism that is going to jump from one country to the next. And for it to kind of be turned on its head and say that that's coming from the United States based on how woke everyone has become, it's pretty stunning, really.
Yeah. The Daily Mail had an interesting blurb about this that I think describes everything that we're talking about. And they said, quote, "They are arguing that American ideas on race, gender, post-colonialism, especially those coming from U.S. universities, are undermining French society and are an attack on French heritage." I mean, that's a pretty bold statement. And of course, a lot of people would agree, but a lot of people are even scared to agree to that because of our current political climate. And to have France, of all countries, call it out is extremely interesting, especially with individuals like Emmanuel Macron, a former Rothschild banker who was deemed the savior of Europe. He was deemed as this superstar. The mainstream media loved him. We were there. Were you there with me when we were there for Emmanuel Macron's kind of celebration when he won?
Yeah,
The streets were jam-packed everywhere. Everyone loved him. Then he came in, and then he started doing austerity measures, and then he started cutting social services.
Are you sure,
and
though,
then,
it
and then
wasn't
people were freaked out, and then I covered so many riots in France. If anyone knows how to protest, it is the French people. They got crazy, they got intense, and we have seen levels of violence with the yellow vests that we haven't seen before in decades, with the civil unrest that unfolded because of Emmanuel Macron. So to see him now say these kind of things that are against the establishment is interesting, but also, according to the New York Times, he's only doing this because he's trying to court the right during the next election.
But
so
it's
that's the
not-
New York Times, what the New York Times is.
Wokeness is only weirdly left-wing. It's not economic.
Well, it's promoted by the establishment.
Right,
It's promoted
right,
by
right.
the mainstream media. The same mainstream media that kind of boasted him up and made him as popular as he is. That's the contradicting point here that I wanted to point out.
There are a lot of leftists who are anti-woke. There's just not enough willing to speak out and call it out. But there was shout out to Rania Kalik, who's an anti-war progressive, who wrote about she made a video. It was really funny, probably really offensive to these people, called woke washing, where it's like you get the military industrial complex, and it's like, good news, everybody, the CEOs of all the biggest defense contractors are women. We've won. It's like, they're blowing up kids. It's okay. It is a woman of color doing it. Like if that is the measure of success, we got serious problems.
I was gonna say, Luke, with people celebrating in the streets when Macron won, and it suddenly dawned on me that the 2017 French election has so many parallels to the 2020 election just because the candidates involved. I mean, are you
Le
sure?
Pen?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask him, like, were people celebrating in the streets because it was Marine Le Pen who wasn't elected? Because that's what it sounds like. And you get someone who's kind of as milquetoast as, between Biden and Macron.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, I expected Biden to suck. I didn't expect him to I did not expect Biden to be this terrible this quickly.
Well, if you look at the way he was highlighted, I mean, there was a lot of controversies surrounding his banker past, and that was kind of shrugged underneath the rug. And when you were really seeing him, he was seen as an all-star. He was literally praised as the man who's going to save Europe. And people were so angry at him and so disappointed. There was literal chemical agents and evacuation plans made for the Paris capital for government officials because of how serious the protests got. I can't tell you the level of intensity. I mean, I don't even, I got PTSD from what I saw at the Paris protests. And I don't even want to talk about all the gory details, but some of the most intense street fighting I have ever seen in my life happened because of this outrage against Macron. A lot of people are angry with him, so this could be a larger political ploy. I hope not. I don't trust Macron, but he does bring up good points here.
Let's be real. Macron is saying this. People on the left don't view Macron as left wing. He's a bankster. He's far right. He's a nationalist. All of those things. So they viewed him. It's I guess what the problem is, the left. It's similar here with Joe Biden. They're like, oh, Joe Biden's bad, but Trump is worse. They're like, Joe Biden's actually a Republican, but Trump is a fascist. And it's like, okay, but they view Macron similarly. Marine Le Pen was a fascist, and Emmanuel Macron is just far right. So they're like, it's better, I guess, but they'll still protest it.
Yeah, I don't know how I know the French elections are like almost like a jungle primary, like in California. They basically get the top two vote getters, and then they have that runoff. That's the thing, is like the Overton window in just the global political spectrum has shifted so far to the left, yet everybody keeps backlashing against it and voting people who are just so far to the right of that. I mean, Joe Biden. From like the Charlie Kirks of the world, the Trump campaign saying that like Joe Biden is actually a Trojan horse for socialism. The guy has always been a corporatist. Like he's only put big Wall Street, K Street people into his administration.
To be fair, that is corporate socialism at the very least. The big companies get their bailouts. Right. They get their money printed for them, and then everyone else gets the crumbs. Look, when I hear the left complain about that stuff, I'm like, you're correct. I agree. I think socialism is bad. You're mad they're giving it to the corporations. I'm mad about it in general, but also that they're giving it to the corporations. Yeah. And I don't want socialism, but I think we can agree when they print money and just give it to, transfer the wealth from the people to the top, political elites and establishment elites. That's messed up.
Yeah, just look at these PPP loans. I love Tom Brady. I grew up in New England. I'm a huge New England Patriots fan, and Tom Brady is a god amongst men. Why the hell is his company, TB12, getting PPP loans? It's crazy.
I mean, I'm fine with companies getting access to money to pay their employees. Just because a company's big doesn't mean they probably still have employees to pay. The problem is that people can't spend money outside of, for the most part, big box stores and Amazon.
Right.
And so that's funneling all of this stimulus and PPP money back into the hands of major corporations where they can then stockpile it.
If you think that's the problem, wait until you find out about the military-industrial complex and corporate welfare that
I will
happens
tell you
behind the
this.
scenes.
I will tell you this.
Almost made me spit out my water.
The reason why I ever became not involved, but ever got engaged in politics was because of the military-industrial complex, particularly the invasion of the Iraq War.
I got to tell this
the
funny.
start of the Iraq War.
I got to tell this funny joke I just heard. Luke, you have to ask me a question. You have to ask me what's the most common French phrase.
What's the most common French phrase?
I give up.
That's it.
Get it?
Ah.
It's funny, right? Get it? I give up. Are we allowed to make jokes like that on YouTube? I wouldn't be surprised if we get banned for that.
You don't know what it is?
There was a.
Just kidding. Just kidding. World War I reference. Wait, no, World War II reference.
It was in the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. They get into a vehicle with like some Russian guys and he's complaining about the French and he looks over to his friend and he's like, hey, what's the most common French phrase? And he leans over, I give up. And they all start laughing. I give up. French surrender jokes never get old, right?
But to add to the point that you were saying, you made a very good point, especially with this woke culture, because, you know, the guy who created mass incarceration and a cop don't really say you're woke. Don't really kind of support, you know, they say they support Black Lives Matter, but that's what happens culturally. It's used to divide and conquer us. And then the big institutional powers push in their kind of puppet establishment candidates. They come in and then they rule just like they ruled before, with people thinking that something's going to change when it's not.
Joe Biden is literally the institutional racism they complain about.
Yes.
I mean, Black Lives Matter endorses the guy. And then, 40 days after he gets elected, or not after he gets elected, they're like, we still haven't heard from Joe Biden. He's not talking to us.
I'm just amazed that, like, Joe Biden co-sponsored the 1994 crime bill, and Hillary Clinton gets more flack for it for saying the word super predator.
Yeah.
To this day, I just don't understand it.
Because Joe Biden is like fumbly bumbly Joe,
No, I mean I get it. Like the maybe my favorite ever Joe Biden moment was when he was vice president and The Onion ran the Diamond Joe Biden series on him. Just made him look like he was a loose cannon. He had this is the big effing deal, all that stuff. It was funny. I feel like people just like to gloss over that stuff. But you also, Luke, you bring up an interesting point about sort of like the adoption of Black Lives Matter. It's just amazing how so many of these global corporations, and they're global corporations, it's no longer such a thing as corporate America, because these countries have basically fled the United States. And they go to countries like China, they go to Southeast Asia for basically tax shelters. When it comes to things like Black Lives Matter and racial equity or what have you, they rather flock to the Chinese Communist Party and get that sweet, sweet revenue.
Yeah.
Like through Nike, through Disney, say that they support like equal justice for all. And then on the other side of the Pacific, you have the Chinese Communist Party locking up 1 million plus Uyghur Muslims just for the crime of practicing their faith.
That's true, but shout out to Disney for giving a thank you to the paramilitary group that's actually enforcing that, because they helped make Mulan, I guess.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's that. I mean, like.
Talk about woke, huh?
Yeah, talk about woke.
And now Biden appointed, the former Disney representative to be the envoy to China. Very fitting. So everything works great. I love being lectured, by all these politicians, corporations, the entertainment industry, Silicon Valley about racism and injustice. When it comes to China, they're absolutely silent about it.
Yeah.
They won't dare talk about the actual racism and injustices that happen there, since of course they're, they get money from them, and that's crazy.
Look, I got to ask, what is it that creates this kind of person who lines up in lockstep with massive multinational corporations, the most notorious human rights abusers, to claim they have moral authority over anybody? It's like the people standing next to McDonald's and Starbucks and Nike are like, we're morally just and you're the bad guys.
You know what it is? It is, all politics is local. When you don't have sort of add the human element of, say, for example, say if there were 1 million Americans who were locked up in the Chinese in these re-education camps, then Americans might actually care about it. But until that happens, these are foreign, distant people. We'd never heard of them before, and therefore,
yeah, I would have agreed with you maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But now you've got articles in The Nation where they're like, I'm for prison abolition, but I want all of these Trump insurrectionists locked up.
Yeah.
If they came out and they were like, China has detained 1 million Trump supporters, people in this country would be like, it's tough, but this real threat is important that these people are seeking help. I mean, they're literally calling for truth and reconciliation commissions. They've legit been doing it for some time now. And it's only a matter of time. I mean, they're going to start firing people.
Yeah.
They're slowly there's this creep going on where one day they'll say, it's really bad that, this racist person did this thing. 2 days later, they'll say, this is the most dangerous thing we've ever seen in our lives. Then a week later, they'll say, we're literally facing extinction because of what this man did. Like every day, whatever this one thing was, they exaggerate it. And they. So I'll give you an example. The January 6th incident, right, with the storming of the Capitol, it was definitely bad. These people stormed in. But what they keep, they've like completely forgotten or purposefully flubbed over what really happened. Some people stormed to the front, fighting with cops, pepper spraying them, hitting them, all that bad stuff. And a lot of people walked leisurely through the doors that were opened by police and took selfies with police officers. So that's all forgotten. And now all that anyone remembers of that day is like a horde of violent insurrectionists with a plan. There was no plan. These people have no idea what they were doing. Now they're trying to impeach a president over it.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing is how AOC turns that day into, she fabricates this story, and I mean it. She literally fabricated a story because all that people remember about the 6th was the storming of the Capitol. They ignore the entire morning of and what happened. So now AOC can claim in the early afternoon something happened that made no sense. It's like we forget essentially what happened on the day, and they gaslight us over and over again to make it seem worse than it really is. That's like leading to this dramatic escalation where we could get to a point. We're at a point where they're basically like, we should bring the war on terror home domestically to go after the Trump supporting extremists.
There's like a lack of critical thinking or like a short-sightedness. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it, that I think a lot of people suffer from. I don't really surround myself with those people. I'm used to hanging out with like people that actually like think about the past and like equate that with what's going on and like think about it. So, but I think a lot of people just are kind of driven by like a lack of memory. Maybe they don't have as good of a memory or something.
Lemmings.
Well, there are actual scientific studies that your memory tends to worsen during a traumatic event, or at least the correlation between your memory not being as good. That's why, it's so important during criminal prosecutions and trials that you have multiple accounts. You can use forensic evidence to try to prove a particular suspect or defendant committed a particular crime, because people's memories are very unreliable now. And I mean, we were talking obviously before the show about AOC's timeline. It's so difficult for people to sort of, I'd say the biggest folly of all of that is that a lot of journalists who were covering that did not take a step back to actually fact check exactly what was going on. And they just took it at face value. Not
even conservatives.
Yeah.
We'll give everyone the context. AOC tells this story, and we've talked about it quite a bit, about, being in the Capitol and fearing for her life, thinking she was going to die because a cop was knocking on the door and she didn't know it was a cop. So everyone just kind of took it at face value. And then Michael Tracy, a journalist, made a comment that she was manipulative, and that became the news cycle. A day later, someone went, hey, wait a minute, she wasn't even in the Capitol building. The story she was telling was she was in her office. And everyone went, whoa, she wasn't even at the riot? And then I saw everyone, even Ben Shapiro were pointing this out, saying, maybe she was scared, but she wasn't even in the Capitol. And so I did this tweet. And I had a journalist from Huffington Post hit me up saying my timeline was wrong. I was basically saying she was exaggerating the story because the evacuation she referenced, everybody was leisurely strolling through the building like nothing was happening. So her claiming she was fearing for her life when everyone was fine. Well, I deleted my tweet because he told me that I was wrong and I believed him. Turns out he was wrong. Everybody was wrong. AOC's story about being pinned down in her room while someone banged on the door happened a full hour and 10 minutes before anyone stormed any building, before the Capitol was breached. So what happens is, now that it's been a month and most people have forgotten the timeline of that day, and they only remember the snippet of people stormed the Capitol, it was scary. When AOC comes out and says someone banged on my door, it was scary, they instantly just mash that day into one moment, ignoring the timeline of events. And then you realize AOC fabricated that story. There's literally no way she thought, quote, they got in, when no one had any idea that was going to happen. I was watching the Twitter feeds. I was watching the live streams. I was watching Trump's speech. And at 1 p.m., I uploaded a video where I said, it's over. Everyone's going to leave. That's it. It's boring. Nothing's going to happen. Literally at the exact same time she thought the world was ending, I was saying, it's nothing's happening. It's over. And then an hour and 10 minutes later, they breached the building. So she makes this stuff up.
What's even worse is how you get even the fact checkers like from Snopes then using their gravitas and authority to basically, in a February 3rd article titled, Did AOC Exaggerate the Danger She Was In During the Capitol Riot? They rank it mostly false. And then they say what's true. Ocasio-Cortez wasn't in the main Capitol building where the House and Senate chambers are located.
But think about that. They try to argue, yes.
Yeah.
They're like, she wasn't in the building.
Yeah.
But the people were storming it and she was scared. And I'm like, no, it was over an hour later, and they didn't evacuate the House chamber until 2:39. So what? A full hour and what is this? It was an hour and 40 minutes later they finally evacuated, and they're claiming she didn't exaggerate. They
did. I mean, they did say this is what they said. What's false? However, Ocasio-Cortez never claimed to be in the main Capitol building when the attack on the Capitol began. Ocasio-Cortez was, as she stated, in her congressional office, which is located in a network of office.
And that's not true. She wasn't in her office at the time. She was evacuated at 1 o'clock before the storming. What does it say specifically? Can you read that?
Yeah, which is located in a network.
No, it said when the riot happened. Is that what it says? What is the exact quote?
When the attack began on the
Oh, okay, right. And so you could argue that the breaching of the barricade was an attack. They'll get semantic on you.
Right, they'll move the goalposts.
But AOC was evacuated. They did give the all clear at 1:53, so maybe she went back to her office, which would be very strange for her story. I was terrified they were going to kill me, so I went back to my office as the riot was happening.
And that's why they came kicking her door down looking for her, basically.
They didn't go to her. They never went to her building.
They're like, open up, where is she?
That was a cop at 1 o'clock.
Because she didn't report to where she was supposed to be?
No.
Oh, did you ever figure out why that
Yes.
was?
A cop was going and telling everybody they were clearing the building because of a bomb scare.
Okay.
That was according to a Huffington Post reporter.
That because there was a bomb planted at the RNC, which is just right outside Longworth and Cannon.
So what made her think someone knocking on her door was they got in and this was the end of her life? She had no idea.
Panic attack. Yeah.
But that's deep paranoia, or she's just lying. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. We do the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., so come back to check us out when we go live. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and we are also available on all podcast platforms for free if you want to listen to us there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.